Hello, everyone. Welcome to March. We're going to be having a discussion with Mr. Jeff Hanley. We're going to give a few minutes for everybody to join. And hopefully this month, if you were here last month, I had some issues with chat, but this month we seem to be back in gear and are available to have chat and the Q&A. So if you can say hello in the chat with your name and your organization, we would appreciate it. And we'll give everybody a couple minutes to join and introduce yourself in the chat. Thank you.
All right. Looks like people are putting their information in the chat. Thank you so much for that. Seems to be working, Elise. Everything is
Thank
coming up
goodness.
roses. Great.
Here we are. And welcome everybody who, if you're new, if you've been here 20 times, if you have sporadic attendance, we are always happy to see you here for the first Wednesday webinars. Again, we'll have this Wednesday webinar, and then April and May we'll look at our focus on recruitment, where we're moving forward and what's happening. Excuse me. As the tips for the webinar, introduce yourself. We don't have any polls this session. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A, or if you use the chat, you can just put in capital letters question, and we're monitoring the chat and we'll pay attention. Lee will introduce everybody once we get there, but I want to say that you will receive this recording next week in a MailChimp that will go to everybody. And in that MailChimp, you will have an opportunity to look at some details for the PAYS advisory group. We're going to start recruiting some additional members for the PAYS SAG, which is the PAYS advisory group. And we just want to bolster the people who are sitting around the table and the individuals that use the PAYS. How do you use it? What do you do with it? And we really want some input, because there's going to be some changes as we're going into 27, looking at a possible smaller 6th grade survey, kind of bridging a 4th grade and a 8 to 12th grade survey. We're looking at the scales. We're looking at what information do we use. We hear all of the feedback, and really we do, but it does take a lot of time, energy, and effort to make changes. So we hear you that the survey is too long. The survey needs maybe a little more cohesive flow. We want to know what people use and what they don't use, and have your valuable input be part of that. So next week, when you get the recording, there will also be a link for the PaySAG application to become a member. And if you are interested, you can reach out directly to me if you don't get that email, or that you are interested and don't want to miss it. We would love that. I would love to have anybody who is very interested in joining. We meet once a month. We meet on Fridays for an hour and a half. There are some subcommittees right now that are meeting with the survey design, kind of really diving into that science and research, looking at what we want, what we use, and how to improve the PAYS overall. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware that that will be coming your way. And if you don't receive it or you don't see it, please feel free to reach out to me, and we would love to have some members that I know are here and very valuable and involved in the PAYS sitting on the advisory group for us. So I think that's probably all I have to say. And I'm going to throw it over to Lee, and we'll get started as soon as we can.
Great. Thanks, Elise. So, yep, I'm looking, and it looks like we've got 40 people here, but only about 25 people commented in the chat. So please don't forget to put your name and your organization in the chat so we can have that information. We love to know that information. We want to know who we're chatting with when we're having these conversations. So please include that. Also, just to reiterate, we will be monitoring the Q&A section So Phyllis and I will be very mindful of that, and we'll be answering questions when we can, or we'll be answering questions live if we feel we need to do that. So if it needs a little bit more explanation, we'll do so live. Hey, don't forget to like EPIS on Facebook. That's where you're going to find all of the great PAYS information. We have a lot of social media content coming out here soon. So that's where you can find that. Share that on your organization's Facebook page, share that on your school's page. This is information that we encourage folks to share. So please do so. Here's us, the panelists today. We don't have Jeff or Mary with us, but we do have Martha with us, and we have a guest in Kayla Smith too. But with us, as always, is me, Elise, and Phyllis. So if you have any questions, we'll be the ones who are monitoring that. And thanks for being here. I just wanted to put our regular plug in for the Prevention Learning Portal. So check that out if you're not already registered, so you can do so. There are 2 PAYS modules on there now, and maybe more to come in the near future or in the future. So check those out, and there's a lot of other great resources on there for folks too. So please do that. So then that brings us to today's topic. Today we are talking about PAYS in action. So it was very important for us to be able to provide to all of you information about what PAYS looks like in action, specifically around advocacy work and how people utilize the data that they're collecting in the Pennsylvania Youth Survey to support their causes. So today we have with us Jeff Hanley. He's the executive director of the Commonwealth Prevention Alliance. So we're so glad to have Jeff here. He is going to talk about his statewide initiatives that he has going on, and what that means, what PAYS means to that initiative and that effort. So thanks for joining us, Jeff, and it's up to you.
Thank you, Lee. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Elise. It's always great to be here, and nice to see so many different folks on the call today. It's okay if I start to share my screen, Lee? Um, let's see here. Yeah, I'm wrong screen up there. Just a second. Can you see that okay, or are you seeing all the slides or just the one slide?
We're seeing all the slides at the bottom and
Okay.
your one slide, so you might want to.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
Always technology, right?
And I always seem to, I don't know why I struggle so much with Zoom screen sharing, but I certainly do.
I do too sometimes.
Okay. So we should be good now. If there's any issues there, Lee, please let me know.
You might want to, I think that's good. Yep, that's good.
Okay. Okay. Well, thanks again. Sorry about that. But I'm here today to talk a little bit about PAYS and prevention in action, and how I'm able to utilize PAYS when I'm doing some advocacy work, and why I utilize it, and why I feel it's kind of important for obviously the work that we do. So today, one thing that I like to talk about is, and hopefully you all can get from this presentation, is what if you believe your prevention story can influence policy change? Then you don't have to advocate without data, and the data that makes prevention easy to brag about. And hopefully you will imagine advocacy as a combination of stories, data that decision makers can't ignore. So just a few things I wanted to share that CPA, some of our advocacy initiatives, prioritizing prevention funding, opioid settlement dollars, and then policies for community health. So we're always looking at what does that look like, and how would any sort of policy impact the work that prevention does in the field. So one of the main things, obviously, is the legalization of recreational marijuana. But one data link that I saw of information is that 90% of kids who vape say they do it for the flavors, which I thought was really interesting. There's also a policy initiative that we can look at and have conversations with legislators about. Um, when we talk about advocacy, it's always, I need to go speak to my legislators, and that's part of it. But there's also different things that you could do. And I heard Lee mentioning, follow on social media. That's a 1 minute advocacy where you can make an impact. Share information on social media. You could share videos. You could then, have a visit with the legislator or a decision maker, or you could do like an all-day type town hall or PACE summit, things like that. So don't think of advocacy as necessarily just visiting legislators. Advocacy could be anything where you're really using your voice to promote prevention and your efforts. And why is it so important? Because if you don't use your voice, someone else will use your silence. And we've seen that happen throughout the past. Since I've been a CPA in 2019, we've seen people outside of our field of prevention using our silence. And we need to make sure that we're out there. There's a little bit of sense of urgency nowadays that we continue to talk about the great work that is happening in the field. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what advocacy looks like for me. And my advocacy efforts have really changed since we brought in Joseph Green about a year ago to do a training, to talk about different things and to talk about sharing prevention stories. So when advocating or educating decision makers and community stakeholders, we have to start to give them something to brag about in prevention. I think recovery does an amazing job about with this. And I don't think we do as great of a job when we're talking about prevention, we're talking about PACE. So we have to give our legislators, our decision makers, something to brag about. So when we're talking about leave behind, when we're talking about a prevention story and prevention glory, we want legislators to leave a meeting with us, identifying a prevention story in their life, and then also providing them with that glory. How can they brag about the prevention work that is happening in their community? We need to give them that information that they can share and talk about. So again, when visiting legislators, I just kind of follow this little 4-step process. The good stuff. We want to talk about outcomes. We want them to reveal the prevention story and what were their protective factors. Then you want to bring it home with your local data, particularly your PACE data. And then again, what can they brag about from your story? What can you provide them with to brag about? So it's easy for a legislator to visit with a treatment provider and they can sit there and brag about, oh, yes, thank you so much. You helped remove that waiver that created more access to treatment, or if it's recovery, thank you so much for coming to our recovery event. We don't necessarily do that as well in prevention, and we want to make sure that when we're talking to folks, we give them that glory that they can brag about in their community. So when I advocate, I really look at, because I'm not necessarily specifically dealing with county, I look at a little bit more from statewide efforts and what's been happening. And this is my favorite all-time slide. And it came from SAMHSA. But this is talking about the power of prevention. So this is a prevention program. And look at these outcomes. So among exposed kids who participated in this program, they had better outcomes on full misbehavior, heavy alcohol use, mental health, blah, blah, blah. Among the offspring of those exposed kids, they also had better outcomes. This is an amazing piece of data that we need to really share. This should be it for all of us. We should be able to show this study and sit there and say, this is why prevention is important. Look at this. Not only are you impacted as a participant, but your offspring can be impacted also. But there's more, right? There's a family checkup. We're talking about 3 years after participation in this program, youth reported positive outcomes. At age 23, folks who participated had positive outcomes. The CTC model, and then there's folks who like the cost benefit analysis. What does that look like? And there's cost benefit data that you could share with your legislators and your decision makers. And one thing too that I find interesting is that SAMHSA reports that 80% of students receive some form of alcohol and drug education. However, only 20% of those are evidence-based prevention programs. So what is that other percent? And what does that look like? I think we can always kind of guess, maybe it was a one-time speaker, maybe it was something else. But we really need to look at that and make sure that we're providing evidence-based or evidence-informed prevention programming to our youth. When I go to visit youth, and this is youth, or excuse me, legislators, this is where Joseph Green and his storytelling really impacted how I talk to decision makers now. Um, so I take an image, and this is of a school play. This is just a generic school play. I saw this picture online, but the one most recent legislator I visited, one of the schools in his district had a play, and and I took a picture screenshot right off of the desktop from that local newspaper. I dropped it in, and I said to the legislator, "What do you see here?" And they would sit there and say, "Oh, that's a school play." But what else do you see? Well, I see these looks like high school students having fun. They're engaged. They're participating. I'm like, what do you think the audience is doing? Well, the audience is probably clapping for them. They're probably talking about that. So I sit there and then I translate this into like, those are all protective factors, right? We have full involvement, we have full participation, we have pro-social activities, and then we have rewards for all this pro-social behavior. These students are participating, they're having fun, they're being rewarded, they're in this alternative activity that's very, very positive. And then my next question to the legislators is this. Share with me how does this resonate with you, your life, your growing up? What were some things that you did or you participated in school? And it's always things like, oh, I wasn't in the play, but I did sports, or I wasn't in the play, but like kind of had legislators tell me once, I was kind of a little bit nerdy and I was in these other clubs, and then I went to college and I participated in chess club and I did that and those sorts of things. And one thing that I think is really important is that birth prevention story typically focus around protective factors. So it could be family connections, supportive friends, engagement in activities we love, and access to quality education. That when we visit with the legislator, they walk away and we tell them, that's your prevention story. Okay. That is something that resonated with you. So you had these protective factors in school. And that's what we do in prevention. We help provide that protection. We help to reduce those risks. And then part of this is obviously their preventing glory. What do we want them to walk away with and say, hey, you are responsible for this? Again, this is what treatment and recovery does so well. And we need to share the great things that are happening in prevention. But too often we go in and we say, have you heard about fentanyl, xylazine? Did you hear this blueberry huffing spray that's coming out? And even though those are things that we want to make sure we're providing education on, we need our legislators to walk away looking at graphs like this and tell them, you did this. Your support of our block grant dollars, your support of our community prevention efforts, your support of our DFC, our C2C, our SBA did this. And we want them to walk away from saying, look at these trends in alcohol, marijuana, and vaping amongst Pennsylvania's 10th graders the past 30 days. And look at this, folks. Like, this is amazing. This is amazing. And we need to make sure that we highlight this, and we need to make sure that we talk about this constantly. And there's not any type of a more successful public health and prevention campaign than tobacco and nicotine. This is just absolutely incredible and really a blueprint on how this works. Obviously there was this years ago the Surgeon General report, and then there was the lawsuits, and then there was the funding, and all of that happened, right? But we're seeing things like that happen again with alcohol right now. We're seeing the Surgeon General come out. We're seeing discussions around dietary guidelines. We're seeing the National Cancer Institute release data on the connections of alcohol use and cancer. And then we're seeing young adults in college that are really either abstaining or being very, very responsible with their use, which is something we didn't necessarily see 10, 15, 20 years ago. So these are, again, public health prevention, nicotine, tobacco reduction. We need to make sure our legislators know that they are the ones that should be out there in the front bragging about the work that they did to support these efforts of all of us in the field. So this is Senator Corman, Center County. He's retired a couple years ago. But this is just something that I would go to him and talk to him about, and I would make sure that, hey, listen, Senator, you're responsible for this, and we really want you to talk about this, and we want you to know that we're grateful for your support in these efforts. So, And then, as we're talking with legislators and decision makers, it's important that they know that upstream prevention is not something specific, and that's for a reason. It's because of the prevention research and the prevention science, how it focuses on the risk and protective factor model. Okay, so again, it's important because these suspects are ever present and evolving, right? We know that there's cigarette and nicotine use. We know about vape pens. We know about e-cigarettes and blah, blah, blah. Alcohol still a drug of choice across Pennsylvania, and illicit drug use and marijuana. Folks know about one pill can kill, fentanyl, xylazine. The important thing that we do in prevention, though, is we prepare youth for all of these. Okay, the substance to us doesn't necessarily matter because we address the risk and protection. If we're not making a connection with mental health, phase data, what that said, and our prevention efforts, I think we're missing a golden opportunity for our legislators. So you all aware of these questions on the PACE survey, and then of course their relation to depressive symptoms and youth substance use. This is a really, really good slide or information to show your decision makers because it really does make that connection of high depressive symptoms and youth use. But everything just comes back to right here. What are the risk factors that we address? What are the protective factors that we enhance? And I think talking to legislators about, hey, we're preparing youth regardless of its substance. We're talking about risk protection. We're talking about building resiliency. We're talking about building those skills to really help them regardless of the substance. And that is something that is so unique in the different sectors of the field that we work in, that we look at it differently. And we need to make sure that we're really highlighting that with our decision makers. And of course, there's those risk factors. But again, if I just look at this graphic, the positive prevention outcomes, what are they when you're visiting legislators? Open up with these great things that are happening. Here's the PACE data to prove it. It could be statewide, it could be with the community. Get them to reveal their prevention story. Get them to do that. I used to take a picture of them myself with my wife and my mother-in-law playing dominoes. And, I would say, what do you see here? And they would say, oh, you're playing games. And then they would say things like, I had a legislator one time tell me, oh, that reminds me of going to bingo with my mom when I was a kid and how awesome it was because I would just serve coffee and people were so nice to me. And then, I remember a community doing some get-togethers and having like cookouts or like not bonfires, but out by the fire and doing s'mores and he's sharing his protective factors, community engagement, family bonding, and I was really able to sit there and say that's the prevention story, and that's the work that we do. So get them to reveal their prevention story, bring it home with your local data, and then give them something that they can brag about. And then if you get to the point where somebody's saying, how can I support you? That's their meaningful change and impact. And how can they support you? Well, could they come to the town hall? Could they support the block grant funding? They look at more funding for DFCs and CPCs. Are they aware of the prevention funding related to the opioid settlement dollars? So when they ask that question, be prepared for that big ask that you could have ready for them. Again, it could be just coming to something, or it could be like, hey, we really need to support with this funding. And then of course, who are your local decision makers? I think it's really something to look at. Again, I think it's really important we talk to legislators, but there are other opportunities out in your community and what they could look like, and just many different groups to have these conversations with. So that's kind of, what I really wanted to wrap up with and talk about with when it comes to advocacy. I want to hear just a couple different things we're working on CPA, but your leave behind to the prevention story and the prevention glory. And we need to do that kind of, I think, really concrete understanding. Our legislators, our decision makers, they leave with a story, they leave with the glory. So they can tell their prevention story because you helped them. You let them know what's your prevention story, and then you gave them something to brag about. So those are the things that have really the past year been focusing on, just because of the help of the Green and some of the things that he's really, brought to the table for us. But I think some things we're working on and talking about a lot at the Capitol and locally around. There's been some renewed interest in medicinal marijuana programs. This we've highlighted in blue on the left, number 1 and number 2 didn't pass. But I think I think a couple things. We need to provide more support to the state to run this program and oversee this program, the Department of Health. They need support. And that's one thing that I always like to talk about is that, we need to make sure that we're providing them with the resources necessary. But these number 1 and 2 were some things that were brought up that didn't pass. I think they will probably look at these again. Anyways, then there were some court decisions about releasing data. So we talk a lot about this when we're talking to legislators about recreational marijuana, because we really want to take a look at medicinal first. And we want to make sure we have an understanding of what is working and what isn't working. So anxiety disorders, the top reason qualifying for medical marijuana. So this was released through Spotlight, Pennsylvania. They ended up suing the Wolf administration and getting this data released. But this is something that's really interesting, and you may be aware of this. And again, I'm not like comparing THC and marijuana to opioids or painkillers when we're talking prescription, because there's obviously a huge difference there, right? But we do understand that a small amount of doctors can cause some issues and cause some harm. And most doctors prescribing, I shouldn't say prescribing, issuing a medicinal marijuana card are doing a really responsible job of it. However, there were a handful of providers that issued in 1 year anywhere from 8,300 to 14,600 cards to patients across Pennsylvania. And let's say somebody's issuing 14,680 certifications. That means they're issuing 40 certifications per day, and they're taking 15 minutes with each patient, working 10 hours a day, 365 days a year. No weekends off, no lunch breaks, no holidays, no vacations. I'm not so sure that really prioritizes patients. So when we're talking about recreational marijuana, we really talk about medicinal, because we want to make sure that we look at this before we look to proceed into recreational. And prioritize patients is number 1, transparency, and then really supporting the providers and supporting the DOH in the work that they are doing. And then again, legalization of recreational marijuana. This is some 2024 bills that they weren't introduced, but memos were created or they were talked about. So I would ignore these bill numbers because they were probably changed in 2025, but we do believe that for the first time, we think a legalization bill will come out of committee in the House, and then it would go to the House floor for a vote. We do believe it would pass, and then it would go to the Senate. And whether the Senate brings it to a vote or not, I don't know. Last year, I thought if they brought it to a vote, the Senate would have passed probably. This year, I'm not so sure quite yet. Recently, Senator Street and Senator Laughlin introduced a memo last month about a bill that they're going to release. This is full-blown commercialization and legalization. So this is a bill that we really have to have some serious conversations about with our legislators to make sure that we're really looking about that commercialization aspect of it. Representative Frankel was the one that introduced the state store model, and that was the legislation that we thought was going to come out. So who knows? We'll try and keep everybody posted. If you want to get on our list for this specific issue, just you could send me an email or let Leah or Elise know, and they'll get me your information. And then finally, I just wanted to kind of talk a bit about our conference. This is flying through here. 2024, we had 389 folks. We have a conference coming up in a couple months, so just give me a second to share some information about it, because we would love to have all of you at our event. It is a hybrid event. We'll have in-person and virtual options. Last year's attendees' motivations for participating, to learn new skills, stay up to date, gain inspiration, network, and of course to have fun. And then we use HUVA interactive engagement, conference engagement, and the HUVA nationwide rate of attendees downloading it for a conference is like 72 or 75%. And we've been over 90% of our attendees have downloaded it. Last year posted 1,700 messages, 5,400 agenda page views, and we had 156,000 impressions on our sponsor and vendor pages, and 74 photos were shared and over 1,000 answers to our full questions. So we're going to use HUVA again here in 2025, just because it seems like it is engaging and folks are interacting with it. So our registration will be opening up here in almost 2 weeks. We're going to get to Penn Center Hotel and Conference Center, they call it. Registration opening March 17th. Our keynote this year, we're fortunate to bring back around Moody. He's going to do a different keynote this year, Unlock the Power of Your Team, Wednesday. On Thursday, our keynote is Deacon Zarzowski. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, but anyways, prevention, everyone can do it, or can they reframe in the discussion? And then Ricky Barton's going to do a keynote on Friday, a dangerous intersection of social media, substance use, mental health, and exploitation. And we have Arel actually all day Wednesday. He's going to do a pre-conference deep dive into adult development theory. If you were at our conference last year and heard his keynote, you don't have to attend that keynote last year to participate in the deep dive, but he's going to do a 2.5 hour deep dive into that on Wednesday morning. Then Alex Kohler is going to do something on how to make your ideas come to life. That's another option to a pre-conference session. So we're excited to have both of them. And then just a couple workshops. Dr. Dana Milokovic, Relationships Matter, promoting connections, or connected promoting resiliency and healing. Phyllis Law and Elise Barr, like when it rhymes, you keep going the road with that one. Today's Pace, Challenges and Solutions. Rami Eck, I mentioned, from the National Cancer Institute, formerly the National Cancer Institute, is going to do a couple presentations on alcohol. We're going to have Ed Mahone there to do a power session on investigating the big business and medicinal marijuana card. Partnership in Addiction, about moving upstream. AdCare Maine is improving workforce retention in the substance abuse prevention field. The Triple T traders are coming. And then Tom McCormick and Raquel Huggins going to do something around intersecting identities. And then a couple things CPA will have coming out. April 30th, we're having our youth summit. We're going to have 10 coalitions, 100 plus youth at the Capitol to talk about prevention. Advocating for the opioid settlement funds is going to be something for prevention efforts. It's something that we're going to be involved in heavily with the Cross Systems Prevention Network this year. And then Prevention Week is May 11th through 17th. So expect some information coming your way to do maybe some local initiatives. And there's my contact information. If anybody has any questions for me, please, I'm available now, of course, but you can always get me an email too, and we can kind of go from there. So thank you for having me again, Lee and Elise. I appreciate it. And if anybody has any questions, you can, of course, please let me know.
Jeff, thank you so much. That was great to hear. And as folks are pondering their questions, I had jotted down a couple thoughts that I was hoping we could discuss too. So as I was looking at the participants, it seemed like there were a lot of prevention folks on this call today. So I wanted to ask your opinion, or if you could sort of elaborate. And it's funny how you brought this up at the end about advocating for opioid settlement dollars, because that was something that I had on my list to maybe discuss a little bit further. Any can you give us any insight on what folks are advocating for to do with opioid settlement dollars in the prevention realm? Like what should we be talking about, those sorts of things, or any other additional information you can give us about what that looks like?
Sure. We're working with the Cross Systems Prevention Network and Phyllis and that group to really kind of talk about how to provide or how to apply for this funding and what can that look like. So I was fortunate to a couple months ago meet with the trust. We talked a little bit about the prevention and effective and evidence-based and evidence-informed prevention programming. They were incredibly kind and open and just really wanted to hear more. So we wanted to continue to work with them to provide some education on what is happening in the field. But for folks applying in the field, I think it is really important that we really focus on evidence informed programming or evidence-based programming when we're looking to apply. And really, what does that look like? That doesn't mean you can't apply for youth engagement or an alternative activity, but really connecting that with the evidence and the research for more recurring type programming is really important, I think, for the trust.
That's great to hear that those are the things that, because obviously that us prevention folks, that's what we should be supporting anyway. So for the folks who are handing out that money to have that in mind, that's great to know. Also, something that I run into is, I love this idea of storytelling and using that to advocate. That's amazing. And I loved how you talked about how, you can really engage folks with this idea of protective factors. And, you were sharing a lot of information about alcohol use, alcohol use, vaping, those sorts of things. those sort of early initiation drugs. And something that, you know, we sometimes get pushback on in my county is around, well, you know, aren't students using opioids, or aren't students using, you know, these other type things that they're really not using, right? And we can show them that in the pays all day. But do you have any, you know, have you ever received that as a question, or do you have any advice for us to sort of like steer the conversation more to this idea of risk and protection?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's really important though. I think it's important to let legislators know that that's not necessarily an issue, and what we're seeing are these sorts of, this is the use that we're seeing. But the important thing is, like, I particularly won't even answer those questions unless they ask it again a second time. So if I get a question like, oh, 10th grader, yeah, you've shown that data, but what about, 12th graders? Because I'm sure that's higher. That's not the point. So me, it's always redirecting and sitting and saying, well, yeah, I shared information about marijuana and vaping. Here's what our data might say on opioids and prescription. However, we don't focus on them. What we're focusing on in prevention is risk protection and how we build skills to prevent it. So the substance is the outcome. We're looking at these trends going down, and that's where we want you to really talk about, and thank you for your support, because the reason these are going down is because our legislators are supporting prevention efforts, and prevention, public health campaigns, these are highly effective and they're working. So the question isn't about the substance at all. I won't even typically answer that, and I would sit there and say things like, well, that's the wrong question to ask. The question really is, what are we addressing with risk and protection, and why? Why is prevention a science? And let's not focus on those source substances, because this is why it's important. This is why prevention is unique. We are the ones that are focusing on skills and skill development, not on specific substances.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And yeah, I really appreciate that. The idea of using a picture and really drawing people's attention to that, and just it's really great. Elise, Phyllis, do you have anything else for Jeff? I don't have anything in the question and answer, so please, if anyone has any questions for Jeff, now is your opportunity to ask. Please do so. Phyllis, Elise?
Unmute myself. See, we still don't, it doesn't matter, Jeff. We could do this for 10 more years and we still don't. You're muted. Anyway, I don't have anything. Thank you, Jeff. I think it's important, again, as we are in the state right now, really making the stories powerful. And I think it was a very important lesson to see how you've done that, and how the prevention specialists can do that out in the field and in the community. And when you approach somebody, I think it's important tools to have. So I appreciate the information.
Yeah, and I'll say too that great job as always, Jeff. And we talk a lot about social development strategy and theories and all these things. And I think a really great takeaway, Jeff, that I appreciated was the fact that getting someone to go back to what made a difference in their life, and getting them in that space to understand what was your click. Might have been a teacher, might have been a priest, might have been a coach, whatever that, but when you're in that space, take them back. When you're talking about, and advocacy can be a big word and it's a hard word, right? But if you get to this place and let people kind of become a bit vulnerable in a space of, wow, I get this. They're going to immediately be more engaged with you. And what you're doing is social development strategy, but we're not doing the training on it. But you are really putting that social development strategy to work. And I'll tell you, that's one of the things, guys, that I think when you're talking, no matter who it is, it could be a legislator, it could be somebody standing in the line at the grocery store with you, that if people still go to the grocery store, I'm not sure about that, but that the idea of when you're talking about it, this is how you can get people to understand prevention in an easy way. It's not easy because prevention is not easy, but to get them in that relatable space. So I appreciate that, Jeff, a lot.
Yeah, thank you. That's so well said too. And prevention it can be complex, right? It can be sophisticated, but when we're talking, we have to make it sound so easy. get them to share their prevention story and then give them something to brag about. Please give them something to brag about because other sectors do that and they do it better than we do in prevention. And it could be, a program they helped implement. It could be a program they fund in your community, whatever it is. You guys have that expertise locally, but make sure they lead there with the prevention story and understanding some of their protective factors and that. And, so I think, a couple of years ago, we had Carson Hall at our conference and he talked about, he did this real speed voice thing where he was going through the structure development strategy, STAMPA initiatives, blah, blah, blah. He went for like 30 seconds just babbling all of our acronyms. And his thing after that was like, they don't matter. He's right. They don't matter. And if we're talking about them, we're going to lose everybody. But if we're talking about prevention stories and prevention glory, then we can really have a little bit of an impact, I think, I hope.
Oh, definitely. And, as I'm thinking about this from a local perspective, like how do I hone this down a little bit to, schools specifically, as opposed to a legislator or a commissioner, your PAYS data is showing this decline, like you should be celebrated because you allowed us to come in and do prevention programming. And really, making that fit into our narrative locally is really something that I think is super important and valuable for sure.
Yep.
So, we have conversations with legislators, commissioners, all the time. But most of my communication is with teachers, educators, principals, admin for a district, right? And it's a whole lot of, dog and pony show, right? Like you got to do this. And, we're really trying to sell something. And this idea of selling prevention in this way makes it so much easier. And I'm with you, Phyllis. I was thinking the whole time he was talking about social development strategy and how this is that in action. Like this is, giving them that information and using it for our benefit as preventionists to promote our stuff. So I think it's really great. All right. Well, nobody has any other questions or anything in the chat, and we have a chat this time, so I don't know what the problem is. But this just means that you'll get a little bit of extra time back into your day. Oh, yep, great. Thank you, Martha. So we will go ahead and before you go away, we have a few wrap-up things as always. Come back April 2nd, 2025 at 1 p.m. We will be talking about PAYS administration and the fact that 2025 is a PAYS administration year. So please come back and find out what to expect with that. So same time, April 2nd, 1 o'clock, we'll be here. Oh, I went the wrong way. Sorry, gang.
That's all right, Lee. And I put the evaluation, the Qualtrics in the chat. So if you can take a minute to fill out the evaluation survey, that would be great. I know that I'm putting Jeff's email again because Jeff, you replied to the host and the panelists. So anybody who's still on, Jeff apologized. He thought he had fixed his sound, so he was a little bit fuzzy, but hopefully we got through, and I think that was good. And good. So Sarah has a page full of takeaways and some questions later. Good. I hope that there was some really good information for you to be able to move forward and talk with the stakeholders we want to touch. So I really appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you very, very much. Please complete the evaluation, and we look forward to talking PAYS 2025 next month. It's here. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye-bye.